Now turning to a really difficult, sad story, the man accused of stabbing Morgan Freeman's step-granddaughter, who is also his goddaughter, to death, has been charged with second-degree murder. Police say 33-year-old Adina Hines was stabbed to death early yesterday morning.
Police say 33-year-old Adina Hines.
Hey, what is going on with y'all, man? It is Black Balloon, and I'm coming back with another video, so y'all already know what's going on. Alright, y'all. Now, in today's video, I kind of felt like I was going to take it back to, sort of the way I used to do the videos on Sunday. And this video was really a request. And this was something, despite all of my research into the industry, the film industry and music and so on, right? I never actually knew about Morgan Freeman's stepdaughter. Never knew about her. Now, I already had an idea that Morgan Freeman has definitely, he didn't really start to take off until he was 50 years old. And I'm almost certain, I've saw it in a couple of places, that Morgan Freeman is a 32nd degree Prince Hall Mason. And it was hard to really find any other, symbolism from Morgan Freeman outside of the fact that he's worth well over $200 million. And he's definitely initiated with the career that he's had. So this is a freaky story right here, y'all. I'm sure a lot of y'all already knew about this. I promise you, I didn't know until maybe about 2 weeks ago when it got requested to me. I had no idea the way that his daughter-in-law died, right? Freaky story right here.
Okay, brothers and sisters and misses and misters, here's your daddy-o with the sounds to go. No shucking, no jive, and I'm telling you, your music's arriving. Ha ha!
So I knew there was something out there that Morgan Freeman done got away with. And they sure did hide this one. Because, man, if I had no idea about this, that means they did a really good job of hiding this story, right? Look, we're going to jump back into that news clip that was playing in the beginning. Because that's one of the only news clips that kind of goes into detail about her death. And you'll be quite surprised at how she actually died and what type of, ritual was being performed on her as she died, right? That being said, y'all, check this out.
Now turning to a really difficult, sad story, the man accused of stabbing Morgan Freeman's step-granddaughter, who is also his goddaughter, to death, has been charged with second-degree murder. Police say 33-year-old Adina Hines was stabbed to death early yesterday morning in front of her New York City home by a man who they believe was her boyfriend. Witnesses say Lamar Davenport appeared to be performing some kind of exorcism. He was taken to the hospital for a psychiatric evaluation. In a statement Sunday, Freeman said the world will never know her artistry and talent and how much she had to offer. And he also thanked well-wishers for their tremendous outpouring of love and support. Melanie Bromley is the chief news correspondent at E! News. And Melanie, thank you for being with us. There's so many questions of what happened here. Is there anything new you're learning about the relationship between Adina Hines and Lamar Davenport?
Pieces are still coming together as far as their relationship, but what we do know is that they were out to dinner, according to friends, just hours before this incident happened outside her apartment. people who were at dinner with them described them as being ecstatic. It seemed like they were very happy. So, as far as how long they were together, there are some pictures that are going back a couple of months showing them together. So they seem to have known each other a little while, but we're not quite sure exactly when they started dating.
So many alarming parts to this story, and when you hear that witnesses say that Lamar Davenport was, appeared to be performing some kind of exorcism there, in this day and age, when you hear something about that, it certainly is shocking. What more do we know about that?
We know that neighbours say that they heard screaming from coming from outside, and that also he was reciting some sort of religious verses. He was using the word Jesus and also devil at the same time. We also know that when police arrived, she had obviously been stabbed in her torso, they think 16 times, but he was continuing to make that stabbing motion even though she was lying there. So, as far as exactly what was going on, obviously there was a psychological evaluation. But this does seem very unusual.
Many want to remember Hines, especially Morgan Freeman. We know that she was following in her step-grandfather's footsteps as an actor. Freeman really was lamenting that the world would not be able to see what she had to offer. Tell us a little bit about her work and where we may have seen her.
She had been she trained to be an actress, and then she had moved to Memphis where she was working with underprivileged youth, and had just come back actually to New York. She had a role in an indie production and was very, very excited about it. It's interesting when you look at her blog. She wrote quite a lot about her life and her passions, and described herself as quite loud and just this energetic character. So she's going to be somebody who's very, very much missed.
Yeah, talk about the relationship that she had with, the step-grandfather, also godfather as well, Morgan Freeman. How close were they? I mean, obviously close enough that he's going to be her godfather as well. And we're seeing these pictures of the two of them. But as far as their family goes, how close were they?
Now, the first thing that should come to mind from that news clip and the way that she died is that her boyfriend, who, supposedly turned into her killer, was performing an exorcism during her death. Now, they didn't say an exorcism on her. They didn't say an exorcism, on himself, which we're going to assume if you're performing some kind of exorcism ritual, you're doing it on her. But it doesn't really make sense because I couldn't find anywhere else that went into detail about that exorcism that was supposedly being performed. Now, I did find an article that goes into the details of, her death and the relationship Morgan Freeman had with, excuse me for earlier, I was wrong, not his daughter-in-law, but his step-granddaughter, right? So supposedly no blood relation. But think about this, though. He was performing an exorcism on her, we're going to assume. You perform exorcisms to get demons out of people. But like I said, very hard to find anything else on those details. Stabbed over 15 times in the torso. So what kind of ritual was being done on her, right? Now, this is where it gets a little bit more sick. This is the guy on the left-hand side, Lamar Davenport, and Morgan Freeman, and his step-granddaughter, Adina Hines. Now, what's crazy is Morgan Freeman had an affair with his step-granddaughter. Now, this is, this came out in the court case. The defense lawyers for the boyfriend are the ones who, put this out. So we're talking about a girl who Morgan Freeman knew since she was a child. Think about this. Look, check this out. It says before she was murdered, Morgan Freeman's step-granddaughter told her boyfriend turned killer that the actor had been secretly sleeping with her, confirming years-old claims about the illicit affair, according to defense lawyers. Adina Hines disclosed to Lamar Davenport and others that her grandfather engaged in a sexually inappropriate relationship with her. His defense team didn't go into further detail during the trial, and that Davenport and Adina, they often argued about infidelity, and both of them were accusing each other of being unfaithful in their relationship. Says rumors about Freeman's alleged affair with Hines have swirled since 2009, y'all, which is when it was first reported by the National Enquirer. Gossip sites later claimed that the relationship was serious and that the two were even planning on tying the knot. While they aren't related by blood, Freeman has known Hines since she was a small child and has been a part of her life for years. Check this out. The 80-year-old adopted her biological mother, Dina Adur, during his first marriage to Jeanette Adur Bradshaw, and then helped raise Hines with his second wife. Freeman and Hines have both said in the past that the claims about them sleeping together were completely false. Y'all, this man was about to marry a girl she was a child. He was, in his 60s when she was a child. Maybe slightly older. He's what, like 88 now? He's old as shit. I thought this was insane. Basically groomed this little girl. Makes you wonder, what were you doing when she was a teenager? But check this out. And obviously this blows it completely open to Adina, unfortunately, being Morgan Freeman's sacrifice. Says the 33-year-old was murdered in 2015, stabbed 25 times outside her Manhattan building by her drug-induced boyfriend. Now, this article doesn't say anything about the exorcism, which I find it weird that it says she was stabbed 25 times outside of her Manhattan apartment building. I don't think in the original news clip they said she was stabbed outside. She was 33 years old, y'all. Says Davenport is on the hook for second-degree murder, which was her boyfriend, and he was facing 25 years to life in prison. And they say he was on PCP, and he wouldn't have taken her life if it wasn't for the drugs. This article doesn't mention anything about the exorcism, but we already know what's going on for her to be killed at the age of 33. And it could be, because she was going to out what Morgan Freeman was actually doing with her, and he didn't want this to get out. And it makes a lot of sense why she was killed at 33 years old. This is Morgan Freeman's sacrifice right here. And I never actually knew this. That number 33, man, it never fails to show up. No matter how old a case is, no matter what's going on currently, it even makes me think about, what I caught? I caught the other week, right? I was watching the third season of Squid Game. And y'all know when it got to the end of the season, if y'all watched it, I think the prize money was like 46.5 billion won, right? So me being curious, I'm like, let me go to Google and see how much 46.5 billion won is in American dollars. And for some reason, I was just curious. But when I went to type it in on Google, other people had searched it too. It's a popular show. People want to know what that money equates to. And you wouldn't believe it. You wouldn't believe it. You already know what I'm about to say. I think it was 45.6 or 46.5, whichever one it is. It equals to 33 million US dollars. I said, oh my God, they are going to squeeze that number 33 in there whenever they can. So it lets me know one or two things. The creator of Squid Games is a 32nd degree Freemason. Really, there's nothing else because it's not a U.S. show, although they are about to make one here in the United States. I think going to be based in L.A., but it just goes to show you that number 33 is still very relevant. We do this stuff because they still do the symbolism. They still sacrifice. They still do, all this occult stuff. And I just thought that was insane. It just kind of blew my mind, but I wasn't surprised. So look, I want to use the back half of this video to go into Carlos Santana and, a little bit about him and his occultish dealings, rock and roll, so on and so on. So I had came across a video that was like 12 years old, and it went into a little bit about Carlos Santana, famous guitar player, so on and so on, right? I started to do my research and man, found some very interesting stuff about him. So I wanted to use this video to be like two topics that I've never discussed on the channel. I've never talked about Morgan Freeman, definitely never talked about Carlos Santana. But with that being said, y'all, we're going to go ahead, flip the switch a little bit, and we're going to get into some stuff about Carlos Santana, all right? Check this out.
Carlos Santana's album Supernatural received an unprecedented and record-breaking 9 Grammys. But are you aware that Carlos Santana is a mere tool of the spirit world that he admits assigned and designed the project fittingly called Supernatural?
Music is the vehicle for the magic of healing, and the music of Supernatural was assigned and designed to bring unity and...
Santana's angels are really devils who are using Santana to communicate Satan's age-old lie that we are gods.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I want to get tapped into what he's doing.
You don't ever forget the sound that you hear first inside. Then it goes through your fingers, through the guitar, to the amplifier, to the speakers, to the monitors, up into the PA. It hits the people, 550,000 people.
Santana even reveals the true identity of some of the spirits who are using him. He says, quote, "The energy of the devils and the angels is the same energy. It's how you use it. It's fuel. The halo and the horns are the same thing. Geniuses don't have time to think about how it's going to be received. They don't have time to think whether people like it or not. Is it morally right? Will God like it?" Santana said, "I'm seeking to validate angels and devils with the same reverence." He said, "It's okay for your nipples to be hard and for you to be foaming at the mouth and you're really aroused." He said, "I'm not afraid anymore of those perimeters."
I read where you said that when you start playing, you undergo a transformation of sorts. What happens?
When playing on stage, Santana goes through what appears to be a demonic transformation. He says, quote, "I'm not Carlos anymore." He says, quote, "When I see it on TV, it's like another guy playing." Santana sounds a lot like John McLaughlin, who Santana cut an album with, who stated, quote, "When I let the Spirit play me, it's an intense delight. My role as a musician is to make everyone aware of his own divinity." Santana declared that when he and Eric Clapton got together to perform for the album Supernatural, they were, quote, "calling out the spirits."
All right, y'all. So you already know when you see Clive Davis personally, up close and personal, with any kind of artist, you already know what's going on. Now, I found two very interesting articles about some of the things that Carlos Santana believed in and he spoke about, especially with the massive, massive success with the album Supernatural, right? Now, if you remember when the clip started, it said that album, if I'm not mistaken, won 9 Grammys. This is insane. It released in 1999. It sold an estimated 30 million copies worldwide, and it holds the title of being the best-selling album by a Hispanic artist in music history. But you would be quite surprised at the origin of how this album began. So it says Santana also reveals in his memoir that he is on a first-name basis with the angel Metatron, a figure found in the Kabbalah and Talmudic writings who is sometimes identified with Enoch, a biblical figure taken up by God to be an angel with the new name Metatron, which I don't necessarily believe Metatron is Enoch, because when you get into stories about it, and when you're about to hear what I'm finna continue reading, this does not sound like a good angel that Santana was supposedly dealing with. He doesn't relate it to anything that sounds good. I think he was talking to a familiar spirit, a demon who tricked him. Now it says, Santana recounts a Robert Johnson at the crossroads type understanding he came to have with Metatron. So that lets you know right there, Metatron is not who he think it is. Because Robert Johnson, he sold his soul at the crossroads for, fame, music, and ability to play the guitar. We already talked about that, right? Now, it says Metatron promised Santana that the album Supernatural would be a great success, would garner widespread radio play, and ultimately be heard more widely than any of his music had been previously, which came to be true. After that scenario played itself out, just as Metatron had promised, the angel came to collect his end of the bargain. "We kept our promise," Metatron told Santana. We've given you what we said we would. Now we're going to ask something from you. That was when the angel Metatron said to me that it's a must. I had to speak publicly about my past. And Santana had been sexually abused as a child by a family friend, a secret he had closely guarded for many decades. One night in London, while Santana was meditating, Metatron laid out the specifics of the deal. Now that you're in radio, we want you to reveal that you were sexually abused, because there's a lot of people walking around with that same kind of wound. Invite them to look in the mirror and say, I am not what happened to me. Then he goes on to say that he resisted to do it at first, but Metatron kept the pressure on. Almost sounds like a humiliation ritual, but this is a devil contract. We blow your album up to be the biggest all time by a Spanish artist, and in turn, you give us something. Honestly, it doesn't really sound like he's telling the truth. Yes, it was true that he was sexually abused as a child, but it doesn't seem like this is what that demon wanted him, to tell, or this doesn't seem like the full spectrum of the deal that he had made to, basically after 10 years of not even being on the charts, all of a sudden in 1999, he blows up bigger than he's ever been before. And of course, Clive Davis had a hand in it. Now, check this out. This is another article that kind of goes into it a little bit more. So apparently, now he was meditating when he, would be taken over by this spirit that he called Metatron. He was basically channeling this spirit like all of the artists before him, right? It goes on to say that it was going to be Santana's mission to rebroadcast this spiritual radio to the children of the world. I'm not Carlos anymore. I'm not bound to DNA anymore. Metatron told Santana explicitly, you will be inside the radio frequency for the purpose of connecting the molecules with the light. And this is, Metatron's cube. So it says that he knew what that meant. It meant he was to set out and finally record some new material, but it wouldn't make up just any album. What kind of album would this be? Santana explained it to Rolling Stone in 1999. This is what he said, y'all. I know it sounds new age, but in my meditation, this entity, which is called Metatron, he said, we want to hook you back to the radio airwave frequency. We want you to reach junior high schools, and universities. Once you reach them, because we are going to connect you with the best artists of the day, then we want you to present them a new menu. Whoa. Yes, target the kids. That doesn't sound suspicious at all. It's like, that's the person who wrote the article. It's like, yeah, go ahead, target the kids with this music. Of course we want the junior high schools and the high schools. So, quote, this comes from Carlos himself. Let them know that they are themselves multi-dimensional spirits with enormous possibilities and opportunities. We want you to present them with a new form of existence that transcends religion, politics, or the modus operandi of education today. And that was what Carlos Santana told Rolling Stone, that this deity, this entity that would take over him, wanted him to do in the summer 1999. And, there it was. He released an album called Supernatural. The creepy part is that, like I said, he hadn't been on the charts in any serious way for over a decade or longer. It just wasn't popping off for him. But Metatron, this entity, had the solution. He got Lauryn Hill, Rob Thomas of Matchbox 20, CeeLo Green, Dave Matthews, Everlast, Eric Clapton. And this album went on to explode. 15 times platinum. 9 Grammy Awards, y'all. Over 30 million copies, just like that. If you want an example of someone using entities, channeling spirits in order to lift their music, the guy hadn't been on the charts for over a decade or longer. Out of nowhere has the #1 album in the world, 9 Grammys, 30 million plus copies, best Spanish album of all time. Now that is a very powerful demon he was able to channel. Very powerful. And I didn't know this about this album. And once I did the research, mind was blown. Once again, we come across another artist, as famous as he is, the boundaries that he crossed. He was one of those LSD, taking dudes psychedelics before performing at the Woodstock festivals and all that good stuff. So it makes sense, he was able to reach the spirit world, and who knows, what else he got to help him channel those spirits. So yeah, y'all let me know what y'all think about both parts of this video. Thought it would be pretty cool to just go ahead and combine the two. And yeah, man, drop down in the comments. Let me know what's going on, y'all. With that being said, it's Black Balloon, and I'm going to see y'all soon, all right? I'm out.